Good day, and welcome to our virtual discussion where we would be examining the topic Youth, Tobacco, and COVID, in commemoration with World No Tobacco Day, which was on May 31st. Over the years, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been participating in the Global Youth Tobacco Survey, in which students ages 13 to 15 years are asked to complete a questionnaire on tobacco exposure, awareness, and consumption. From the last survey conducted in 2018, the overall response rate was 85%, and a total of 1,519 eligible students in forms 3 to 5 completed the survey. Among the many findings, the survey indicated that 23% of our students have witnessed someone smoking on or around the school compound, and 22% of them have been exposed to tobacco within their homes. We also saw that the trend of electronic cigarettes has crept into our population and has captured the attention of 8% of our youths. Despite the gloomy results, it is encouraging to note that 72% of our students think that tobacco should be banned in public spaces. However, it is unfortunate to note that only 38% of the respondents indicated that they were taught about the dangers of tobacco in their schools. The COVID-19 pandemic is currently the defining global health crisis of our time, and undoubtedly one of the greatest challenges we have faced in decades. Since its emergence in Asia late last year, the virus has spread to every continent except Antarctica. Tobacco smoking is a known risk factor for many respiratory infections, which increases the severity of respiratory diseases. A review of studies by public health experts found that smokers are more likely to develop severe cases of COVID-19 compared to non-smokers. Moreover, fatalities are much more likely among groups with greater risk profiles. On our panel this afternoon is a group of young professionals who want the best for our youths. Dr. Shari-Ann Andrews, consultant pediatrician at the Milton Cater Memorial Hospital. Mr. Delano King, president of the Coast Hill Adolescent Group, and Mr. Marlon Young, youth coordinator. Stay tuned as they share their knowledge and experience on today's topic. We would like today's program to be as interactive as possible, so we look forward to hearing from you, and we will answer as many questions as we can. I am Donnette Cadougan, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Before we go to our panelists, we have brief remarks from PAHO Country Program Specialist for SVG, Mrs. Nicole Slack-Libert.
Good day all. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Donnette. I am Nicole Slack-Libert, Country Program Specialist, as was mentioned. I'd like to say a special good day to the Chief Health Promotion Officer in the Ministry of Health, Ms. Patsy Wiley, and other members of the Ministry of Health. Dr. Shari Davis Andrews, physician, Mr. Marlon Young, Youth Program Coordinator, Planned Parenthood, Mr. Delano King, President, Coles Hill Adolescent Group, and other presidents present in the room, the media, and the viewing audience. I bring you greetings from the PAHO WHO representative for Barbados and Eastern Caribbean countries, Dr. Itades Gibri. I would like to congratulate the Ministry of Health for hosting this activity today to commemorate World No Tobacco Day, a forum hosted for youth, by youth, which will focus on youth and COVID-19 on the heels of the global commemoration of this day on 31st May. Today, I am sure the panel will discuss some statistics regarding tobacco consumption, including it serving as a risk factor for non-communicable diseases, including cancers of the lung, mouth, and throat. With this new pandemic upon us, while there are many unknowns, we are aware that COVID-19 is an infectious disease that affects the lungs, an organ which is also negatively impacted by tobacco use. The recent Global Youth Tobacco Survey in 2018 assessed the knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and practices of youths between the ages of 13 and 15, as well as other factors. And it revealed that 9.3% of youth in this age bracket use tobacco products. While you may feel the consumption rate is not that high, you must also be aware that over 22% of youth in this age group are exposed to secondhand smoke, and therefore you are in fact at risk for diseases as well, including asthma and certain cancers. I look forward to your discussion today, where you will share your views on tobacco use and COVID-19. Your contributions are important to the development of health initiatives, not only here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but regionally and internationally as well. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Liebert, for those remarks. At this time, we'll go to our panel and we'll hear the medical perspective from Dr. Shari-Ann Andrews.
Good day. I'd like to thank you first of all for inviting me to be a part of this very important and relevant discussion. Tobacco smoking, as mentioned in the introduction, is definitely a concern among our youths, as reported in the Global Youth Tobacco Survey. I'm very grateful for this forum in which we could raise awareness, which we could educate and hopefully influence our youths to make wiser decisions about their future. Now, World No Tobacco Day was coined by the WHO in 1987. And it's very interesting that 33 years later, it is still a major problem today. Now, each year, a theme is decided upon to focus on. So in 2017, the focus was on tobacco and the threat it places on development, whether individual development or development of a nation. In 2018, the focus was on heart disease. In 2019, on lung health. In 2020, that's this year, the focus is really for our young people, and it's focused on tobacco, the related industry tactics to attract the younger generation. Now, I'm hoping to go through the prevalence of tobacco smoking worldwide with some information on St. Vincent and the Grenadines, explore the ill effects of tobacco smoking, the link between tobacco smoking and COVID-19, understand why our youths in particular are at risk, identify risk factors and protective factors for smoking in youths, and finally, recognize these tactics that we spoke about that are used to target our youths and promote the use of tobacco. The truth is, tobacco kills. There are 1.3 billion tobacco users worldwide. Every year, more than 8 million people die from tobacco use. Unfortunately, of that 8 million, 1 million of those are due to secondhand smoke. We know secondhand smoke exposes our children, and 65,000 children die each year to illnesses related to secondhand smoke. Unfortunately, globally, every 4 seconds, tobacco takes another life. Now, this table that should be projected shows countries within the region, their prevalence of tobacco smoking, and there's a focus on youths, 13 to 15 from the Global Youth Tobacco Survey, as well as how often someone from that country dies due to tobacco. Now, this was posted by PAHO, the PAHO fact sheet in 2019, but it reflects the data that was collected between 2010 and 2017. And as mentioned earlier, there is actually a more recent global youth tobacco survey with different readings, but it's interesting to have a comparison between the different countries. So this data was based on what was available in St. Vincent in 2011, and the prevalence of tobacco use was 19.4. In comparison to other countries, we're seeing here Antigua, Guyana, and Barbados, who had smaller numbers. But the good news is that our most recent global youth tobacco survey in 2018 shows that the prevalence had decreased from 19.4 to 9.3. There's still a lot of work to do, and I'm hoping that through this kind of conference, we can make positive changes. Now, how does tobacco smoke cause damage? So with just a single breath, hundreds, or I would say thousands of toxins enter the body and starts to damage the lungs. Now, when tobacco smoke is inhaled, it paralyzes what we call cilia. So cilia are those hair-like projections that line the respiratory tract. And what it does is it will rhythmically move dust, mucus, viruses, bacteria, move it away so that you're able to cough it up. However, what tobacco smoke does is that it paralyzes the cilia, allowing poisonous substances to enter the lung and cause damage. Also, it's important to know that tobacco smoke reduces the lung function and it causes breathlessness due to the toxic effect on the airways and the buildup of mucus in the lungs. So the coughing, shortness of breath, what we may see, it's important to know that that is only a small portion of what tobacco smoke does to the body. Tobacco smoke, as I mentioned, contains numerous chemicals that are damaging, 70 of which are carcinogens. What is a carcinogen? It's a substance basically that promotes cancer formation. So there are 70 carcinogens in tobacco smoke. Of the chemicals included in tobacco smoke, the major one that we know about would be nicotine, which is very addictive. But it's interesting to know from this slide that there are many compounds that you would never dream would be a part of tobacco smoke, which include hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, lead, arsenic, carbon monoxide. So we can understand how toxic tobacco smoke is. Now, tobacco smoke increases the risk of many acute and chronic diseases. There are over 20 different types or subtypes of cancer all over the body in which tobacco smoke is linked to. So we may know about lung cancer, but it may be associated with cancer of the mouth and the throat, with kidneys, the bladder, the esophagus. So many parts of the body can be at risk for cancer because of tobacco smoke. Cigarette smoking is the leading preventable cause of mortality in the United States and worldwide. It's preventable. And when I say mortality, I'm talking about death. Now let's go through some systems. So let's start with the lungs, the one that we're probably most familiar with. So we know that it damages the small air sacs and the lungs in general. It's associated with causing COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which includes emphysema and chronic bronchitis. It's also a factor of triggering asthma attacks, and it can make your asthma worse. It's also implicated in lung cancer, and it increases the risk of lung cancer by up to 25%. Smokers are 12 to 13 times more likely to die from COPD than non-smokers. So, since we're on the lungs, let's talk about COVID-19. COVID-19 is still very relevant, and therefore it's important to understand that because smoking damages the upper airways, it decreases the pulmonary immune system by weakening your cilia, you're now more vulnerable to infections. Smokers actually have twice the risk of contracting infections and have more severe symptoms. So that results in a higher risk of infection, higher risk of mortality, which is death. According to WHO, which is our World Health Organization, smokers are more vulnerable to COVID-19 due to one, the inhalation of toxic chemicals in cigarettes. Two, there's also increased hand-to-mouth movement. It's also been shown in studies that smokers have a higher risk of severe cases of coronavirus. So smokers have higher need of intensive care unit admission, ventilator use, and higher risk of death. So basically, a smoker is more likely to have a more severe case and is more likely to die. So smoking also affects the heart. Smokers are at increased risk for diseases of the heart and the blood vessel. It increases your risk for stroke. It increases the risk for heart attacks up to 2 to 4 times. It also affects the circulation by narrowing blood vessels, making them much thicker and, as I mentioned, quite narrow. Smoking plays a role in type 2 diabetes, as it can increase your risk for developing type 2 diabetes, and it makes it even harder to control. It increases your risk for cataracts, so that's if your eyes become very cloudy, visual disturbances, unhealthy teeth and gum, including tooth loss, decreased immune function, rheumatoid arthritis, infertility for both males and females, and if the infant is born, there's increased risk of premature delivery, stillbirth, low birth weight, as well as the baby being born with multiple birth defects. The effect on children. We spoke about secondhand smoke, and young children are definitely exposed, who are exposed to secondhand smoke, will have frequent asthma attacks if they're asthmatic. They'll have an increased number of new cases of pneumonia, bronchitis, and frequent lower respiratory tract infections. And let's always remember air pollution. The fact that it's lingering in the air, it actually can stay in the air for up to 5 hours, putting persons around them at risk for lung cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, and reduced lung function. So we know that there are major complications to the health of someone who is exposed to tobacco smoke. Not only the person who is smoking, but also anybody who is in the environment and inhaling it. Let's not forget the economic impact. Smoking diminishes your overall health. And with that, you probably have more days you're missing from work because you're frequently sick. And that also increases your healthcare utilization and your total cost, the burden of healthcare. It's possible to contribute to poverty, as now you're diverting your funds from basic household needs to now funding an addiction. It causes premature death and disability of productive age adults, and therefore a breadwinner may now have frequent illness or even death and is no longer able to contribute. We know it's beneficial to quit. There are rapid benefits that comes with quitting. In 1 to 9 months of quitting, the coughing and shortness of breath decreases. In 1 year after quitting, the risk of heart disease, coronary heart disease, decreases to about half of what it was as a smoker. In 5 years, the risk of stroke is reduced to that of a non-smoker. In 10 years, your risk of lung cancer falls to half of what it was as a smoker. And in 15 years, the risk of a heart attack is really equal to that of a non-smoker. So we know the toxic effects of smoking. We know the benefits of stopping. But the question is, why are people still smoking? The truth is, nicotine is highly addictive. You look at the boxes, it's clearly labeled smoking kills. However, as mentioned, nicotine is highly addictive. Nicotine, how does it work? It triggers an increase in dopamine, and dopamine, you may hear, is like the brain's happy chemical. Dopamine stimulates the area of the brain associated with pleasure and reward. Just like any other drug, tobacco over time has the risk of causing physical and psychological addiction. And it's not only smoking tobacco, it's also smokeless tobacco, so chewing and other forms of tobacco use. It's interesting to know that most smokers started when they were teenagers. Studies show that smoking is most likely to become a habit during teen years. The younger you are when you begin to smoke, the more likely you are to become addicted to nicotine. Smoking is highly addictive, with nearly 97% relapse rates for unaided quit attempts, meaning without getting any help and decided I'm just going to stop, it's 97% likely that you won't be successful. It reminds me of a quote by Mark Twain, and it says, "Quitting smoking is easy. I've done it hundreds of times." Now, why are adolescents so much at risk? And it goes back to development of the adolescent brain. Now, brain development continues throughout adolescence, and it happens at different stages and at different speeds. Now, there's a section of the brain, the subcortical limbic structures, and that is important for emotional processing. That gets a boost about puberty. It's important for your sexual development, your social development, and it's really triggered by pubertal hormones. However, the prefrontal cortex at the front of the brain, which is important for control over behavior, thinking things through, is actually developed a little later on. So that goes on even until mid-20s. So you can understand that this explains a lot of the behaviors of our adolescents. It seems as if they act before they think, and it's because of the development of the brain. That explains why adolescents may have the characteristic behaviors: risk-taking, novelty-seeking, high play, increased social interactions, with a much more gradual development of executive function, including decision-making and impulse control. So we can understand adolescents would be at risk because they may be peer influence. We spoke about the social development. They may have impulsive decision making. And it's important to fit in socially. And because nicotine, or I would say tobacco use, is one of the most socially acceptable drugs in our society, it's readily available. It's one of the first choices which usually falls on our adolescents. Unfortunately, we know our adolescents are at risk because as the brain is developing, exposure to tobacco smoke increases their risk of developing psychiatric disorders and even impairs their brain development at that point. So it's important that adolescents are well educated and advised on what the dangers are. There are risk factors and protective factors for smoking in adolescents. So this was based on a study of some American adolescents, and they found that the risk factors, what would put adolescents at risk for smoking, would be using alcohol, marijuana, or other illicit drugs, if they're involved in violence, if they're sexually active, if they have friends or family who smoke, if they have learning problems. And what has been protective are those who are doing well in school and family connectedness, meaning the family seems to be getting along. Now, we spoke earlier about the marketing strategies. And I think one of the new strategies that they've been using is to pretend that these alternatives, so we're talking about our electronic nicotine delivery systems, so or vaping e-cigarettes, are safe. It's actually not as safe as we believe. E-cigarette emissions typically contain nicotine as well, and other toxic substances that are harmful not only to the users, but for those who inhale the aerosols that are they're exposed to. So secondhand smoke as well. We know that minors who use these e-cigarettes and these electronic nicotine delivery systems double their chances of starting to smoke using conventional tobacco cigarettes later in life. So it is almost like a gateway into using actual cigarettes. And there are numerous ways that the industry targets our new generation, and that is our focus for this year. So maybe in advertising, so during shows, movies, indirect advertising, so using social media platforms, so YouTube influencers or Instagram influencers are seen using vaping or using cigarettes, and that's a way of promoting it. They may actually promote events, so pay for events so that they could have their products available there. They may even sponsor schools they may even sponsor students to get scholarships. And other marketing tactics are actually using special flavors and scents that would appeal to the youth. So peach flavors and apple, etc., to appeal to the younger generation. So in summary, we know that it is very dangerous, tobacco smoke. We know, importantly, that our youths in particular are at risk to starting a habit of smoking as well as becoming addicted to tobacco smoke, and it's therefore our duty to protect our youth. So let us intervene early, not only to save time, to save money, but also to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Andrews, for that informative presentation. At this moment, we'll turn over to Mr. King, who would speak from a youth perspective.
Good day, my name is Delano King, president of the Coastal Adolescent Group, and it is with great pleasure for me to be representing my group and also the youths of St.Vincent and the Grenadines on this topic of youth, tobacco, and COVID-19. First of all, I would like to tackle the issue of tobacco to tobacco cigarettes and now to e-cigarettes, electronic cigarettes. Now, I could remember when I was growing up. Now, you'll find the older folks using the pipe to smoke tobacco, and sometimes you may question it or you may not question it because you will figure that that is their thing. But as time went by, I recognized there has been a transition now from the older folks using the tobacco pipes, and now we have tobacco cigarettes. And something that I've recognized to be quite fascinating is that on these cigarettes pack is a notice saying that cigarettes, smoking is bad for your health. It is something that has really triggered my thinking. Now you're gonna sell a product, and you gotta understand that yes, you're selling a product. It is marketable. It's something that is selling, but do we really recognize that it is detrimental, not even to our youths, but also to adults, the elderly? Because the thing is that we have so much allowed tobacco smoking, cigarettes as part of our lifestyle that the youths have recognized that, okay, it seems like something is good about this thing. Because we had a discussion one time, me and my group, the adolescent group, and we were speaking about this, and even outside of the group setting, we're speaking about it, that you have a cigarette pack with smoking is bad for your health, said by the ministry, but yet you have it being sold in our shops. And the thing is that the shops are not really adhering to some of the rules and regulations set out in the Tobacco Act. As in, you're not supposed to be selling underage, a minor, these products. But it happens. And so if there is still a standard maintained by the ministry, maybe down to those who are in the position of administration, um, but when it comes down to the shopkeepers, there's a total, there's a completely different thinking, in that you have shopkeepers selling these things to minors, yet they have heard that you're not supposed to. And so the youths are exposed right away to cigarettes. Sometimes you may be thinking, okay, why is dad smoking cigarette? Or why is mom smoking cigarette? Or why is my neighbor smoking cigarette? Why are they asking me to go and buy it? So these are some of the thinking in their mind, and at some point they are thinking, why should I try it? Is it something good? And at that same point, there is nobody really to say, well, this is not good for your health. This is not really what you should be using. This is not something for you. Because the other thing is that we have grown up in society where, especially in the rural areas, we have grown up in these societies where it seems as if those around us, we do not recognize them as role models. And there's a reason for that. It is not as simple as we may think. Because you want somebody to patronize after, you want somebody who you could look up to. But really and truly, there is not that person. And sometimes in our minds, we may be thinking, how is this so? Why do these young people, youths, kids, children, look for somebody outside the community? They may look at a singer, artist. They may look at somebody who is, you might be thinking, they are not living among you. They have a totally different lifestyle. But their thinking is that there is nobody really for me to really patronize after. Because we have grown up knowing as well that you want a future for yourself. But that's just one part of it. Now, how am I going to get that future for myself? Now, we have always heard that birds of the same feather flock together. Now, if you're living in a community, if you're living in a society, a rural area, where I'll also introduce here marijuana smoking is also part of it, then in the back of your mind, then somewhere along the line, you're also thinking that, what is it that is really, you know, what is it that is gonna help me to be focus driven? What is there that is gonna direct me in this direction, that I want to be motivated to get something for myself and get a future for myself? The other issue is that of social media. And it hurts me a lot when I recognize that youths are patronizing these artists. No, I couldn't even stick to watch what was really happening at one point. I was strolling through WhatsApp and statuses, and I saw some of my own classmates using the e-cigarettes. And that hurt, because for me, I knew I was among them, and this wasn't their lifestyle. This is not something they choose. But they are so much influenced by what they hear, that they pick up the same lifestyle and continue down that road. Now, in the back of my mind also is, what is going to happen then? Is it something that's going to continue? Is it that they are not being fully educated as to the misuse of the product? And it goes to show that sometimes they reflect upon their lives and the time span they have lived. I've sit with persons that they would say, if I had known better, I would have done better. Because as time goes by, what you've recognized is that you have wasted much of your life, because you do not have that mental development that you needed, that would give you that driving force to get what you want. Thank you very much. And at this point, I'll pause to allow our Planned Parenthood coordinator, Mr. Marlon Young, to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Delano King, President of the Coast Hill Adolescent Group, for your words of wisdom and experience. At this time, we'll go back to the panel as Mr. Marlon Young, Youth Coordinator, speaks about the social perspective of youth, tobacco, and COVID.
Good day to the representative of the Ministry of Health, the media, my fellow panelists, all who are present, and especially to the youth of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As we embark on this adventure, as we talk about youth, COVID, and tobacco, I would like to begin with a personal experience of mine. I can remember I was only 8 years old at the time. My brother and I, we decided that, seeing that it appeared to be cool that every adult in the community was smoking, that we would take some leaves from one of our books and we would roll it, and we would go at that time to an abandoned outside bath that we had in the yard. And there we rolled it as neatly as we could, and we got the match and we lit it. And my brother, who was 2 years younger than me, he took the first pull. Maybe he was more experienced than I was, but when I pulled, or maybe I pulled too hard, I began to cough. And my mother, who was 50 feet away, heard me coughing, and with a mother's instinct, she ran to where we were. Upon recognizing that we were smoking, I could remember that we received a pair of licking that I can never forget. It was my first experience with smoking, and it was indeed my last time I ever smoked. So, as a person that is involved in youth work, I do not in any way isolate myself from the use of tobacco, because we see it every day in our society. We see it on television, we hear about it in our music. Social media is one that is filled with all of these persons smoking, and now, as we have heard from the presentations of both the panelists before, of the e-cigarette. And you may ask, what is e-cigarette? An e-cigarette is a new way in which they refer to an electronic form of smoking where there is no form of smoke, but one extract the nicotine via the use of electronic. But is it any different? Is it any different from smoking? But before we go any further, I would like for us to basically define what is a youth. And for this purpose of the presentation, a youth would be defined as anyone between the age of 0 and 35. Tobacco, we would define it as a plant-based product that is dried and fermented for the use of smoking, and also one that is used as a distressor. One of the things we would understand about youth, or those of us who are during this age as defined 0 to 35, it is considered to be the healthiest of our life. At youth, we are at the healthiest part of our life. But what is remarkable about youth is that, as you have heard from Dr. Andrews, is that it is the most risk-taking time in our lives. It is where, as young people, we believe that our health is immortal. We believe that nothing can indeed damage us. And it's where we partake in these risks that have long-lasting effects. And smoking tobacco or partaking, whether it be chewing or e-cigarette, is one of the most dangerous practices that we can undertake as youth. As you have heard as well from Dr. Andrews, is that persons who smoke or those who consume nicotine from the tobacco are 2 times more likely to contract bacteria and virus, which means that this exposes you not only to the flu virus or the common cold virus, but we're talking about sexually transmitted infection as well. So these are things that we have to consider when we talk about smoking. When we take it at a time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're talking about where we are exposed to our lungs not being effective enough to combat the pressure of COVID-19 that comes with it. So even though most of us may experience mild symptoms of the COVID-19 virus. Those who smoke are 14 more likely to develop severe symptoms of the virus. Smoking is a behavior, as we heard as well from Dr. Andrews, that involves the movement of hand to mouth, which also increase the likelihood of COVID-19 being transmitted there. And also one of the things that we see among smokers is the sharing of cigarettes or whatever product that they do partake in, which also increase the likelihood of COVID-19 being transmitted from one person to the other. But we may need to consider the reason why young people smoke. Why is it that we're focusing our attention today on youth and not the general population who smokes? And one of the things we have to realize is that the youth of today represents the future of tomorrow. And if we neglect the future of tomorrow, sorry, I need to say that. If we neglect the youth of today, we are indeed neglecting the future of tomorrow. What really am I saying? When we look at the survey that was conducted, we see that 22.4% of our youth are exposed to some form of smoking at home, whether it be secondhand, whether it be direct smoking, or whatever. And for those of you who are not into statistics or may not understand statistics, you may say, what is 22.4%? But let's look at it. Let's say that we have 30,000 of our children, of our population are school age, between the age 15, below the age of 15. We're talking about approximately 7.5 thousand of them being exposed to smoke. We're talking about a future where we have 7,500 persons developing some form of respiratory problems or some form of cancer, some form of kidney problems. We're talking about a strain that is placed on our health care at that point in time. And this is the reason why we need to address it from this angle. We're talking about a lot of our youth today and COVID-19 and the stress that it brings, the very fact that you're not in school, the very fact that you're home and you can't be out with your friends. And we understand that partaking or using nicotine product or tobacco product would be an aid to the stress that comes with it. But we have to understand that there are different ways in which one can distress themselves. We understand that nicotine is very addictive, and this addiction is something that can cost you a lot in the future. If we take, for example, I once had a conversation with a young man, and he said that he smokes about 5 packs of cigarette per day, given the fact that a pack of cigarette for him is about $5. So that's $25 a day. And if we calculate, just would like for you to take out your calculator or your phones, whatever you're using, because each of us have access to that, and multiply 25 by 365 and see how much money he is throwing away at that point in time. So we know that there are a lot of pressure, and Mr. King spoke about the pressure that comes with as youth, but this is why we're here. We need for you to to answer your questions so we can tell you how you can combat nicotine, how we can help you, and how for you not to be engaged in this whole scheme by the media that is being used to wheel us in to think that tobacco is indeed the solution to all of our problems. So at this time, as we discuss youth, as we discuss tobacco, and we discuss it at a time of COVID-19, I will try my very best to answer the questions that come, and also my fellow panelists would also try our very best to answer. So at this time, we open the floor to you to give us your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young, for those remarks, and we enjoyed that story very much. I know many youths can relate to that first time of pretending to smoke with paper. So now we're going to go back to our panel so that they can answer the question that our youths sent in. This question goes to the young males on the panel. As young males in your community, what are you doing to prevent COVID in your community among your peers? And it goes on to ask, how have you been pressured to use tobacco? And if so, what did you do to resist the temptations? So the first one, it's asking what have you done in your community to prevent COVID among your peers?
All right, so what I've done to prevent the spread of the COVID virus in my community is that I've tried to educate as many as possible about the virus and the ways in which it is transmitted. And I've, in different cases where the those who are vulnerable, I've offered facial masks to them in that sense. That's the part that I've taken. Second part of the question, I believe growing up in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and growing up in a rural community that all males have been pressured into using tobacco at some point in their life. One experience that comes to mind is I remember when I was undertaking my first degree, I went to a party. I'm not really a party person. I grew up in a Christian household. And I went to a party and there they had the bong and they had all sort of things inside of it. And they were asking me to use it. They were saying, oh, your parents not here, this, that, that. But I knew myself, and that is what is most important. You have to know who you are. And I knew who I was, and no matter what they said to me, I was not going to try it. And that's the best advice I can give to young people. You have to know who you are. You have to be aware of who you are. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? If that is not the case, then you will be easily persuaded to do things that you don't want to do. So self-awareness is important at this time, not only to say no to tobacco, but for the prevention of COVID-19 as well.
All right, so first of all, for my adolescent group, I live in the coastal community. For my adolescent group, what we have done, we have been able to share the information. So media releases from the Ministry of Health would be shared in the group chat, and persons will be asked to forward this information to their contacts on WhatsApp so that persons can be aware of what's going on. To the second question, which asks about have I ever been pressured before? I think at one time I was asked to try it, but that was by a person who is mentally ill. He asked me to try it, and I was like, no. But at that point, I recognized that something was definitely wrong, so I didn't pay any attention to that. So among my peers, it has been different because they have viewed me as a person who they look up to. Reason being, from since I was small, since in primary school, persons saw me as a leader, and as they came forward and said, Delano, I see you as a leader, you're a person who we look up to. I then say to myself, then if they are looking up to me, then there is something about me that they see that I may not see. I stay true to myself.
So this question is for Dr. Andrews. As an asthmatic living in a house with someone smoking in this time of COVID, what is my likelihood of getting the disease?
Okay, so for an asthmatic living in the house of someone who's smoking, we definitely know that smoking increases the risk of having a severe form of coronavirus, as well as requiring ICU admissions, as we mentioned in the presentation. However, getting COVID depends on being exposed to it, and there are other risk factors that put you at higher risk of getting it. As we've mentioned, the elderly, those who have underlying chronic illnesses, even though asthma is a chronic illness, but it's important to have several factors in place, and just having asthma on its own doesn't mean you will get COVID, but definitely being exposed to COVID, you may have a more severe course.
I'm a young smoker who have tried to quit numerous times but failed. What advice would you give me as a youth coordinator?
Trying to quit tobacco, it's very difficult. And if I could go back to the Mark Twain quote that was used early on, he said that it is easy, but he have done it hundreds of times. That just to say that 75% of persons who are addicted to nicotine thought that they could have stopped on their own at any given point in time. And it starts by recognizing that you need help. It is about finding something that replaces the nicotine or the urge for the nicotine. What I would advise is that if you can find a good counselor, you can, if you can find somebody that you can really rely upon, we don't have any designed program at present for smokers or anybody who wants to quit. But there are some good help on the internet, but you would need support. So you would need that psychosocial support. So you would have to have maybe your mother, your father, a friend, or maybe a pastor or somebody that is going to support you. So support is important, but you have to find the right help out there. So I would say that it's best to start with a counselor at this very moment.
Does vaping tobacco have the same effect on teenagers' lungs as smoking tobacco?
Okay, so that's actually a very interesting question. We mentioned that vaping exposes the adolescent to nicotine as well. So we know nicotine and other toxic substances. So it definitely has a negative effect on the lungs. In terms of, is it similar to tobacco smoke? Vaping is something that is still very new. And I think a lot of we still need a lot more studies, research to be done on the area, and I'm sure with time we will find out. But initially it was thought to be something that was benign, it was not going to cause issues, but we've actually seen with time that there are medical complications associated with vaping and electronic cigarettes, etc.
Smoking sometimes releases stress, and at present, most persons with this entire pandemic situation is very stressed out. Do you think that this is a good time to quit smoking?
I think quitting smoking at any time is indeed a good time. But given the fact that we are in this new normal of social distancing, of protecting ourselves, this whole COVID-19 pandemic, there is no better time to quit smoking. Yes, we understand that this time has brought with it a lot of stress that would not have normally been with us. We're talking about a lot more persons are unemployed. We're talking about a lot more persons are now at home. There is no separation between home and work. There are a lot of us who would have enjoyed that hour or 15 minutes commute from home to work as our relaxed time, as our distressor, where we can blaze our music and we can drive home. But we don't have that anymore, and we have to be real that the stress stuff where we could have sent the children to school and don't have to deal with them. How do you separate home and work when they are in the same place? And yes, because that increases our stress level, we would want to move to distressors. But as much as nicotine is a distressor, we have to think about its effects. And so the first half of the question, I would say that one needs to find natural remedy to distress themselves. Maybe they can look into meditation techniques, maybe reading, maybe walking, maybe all of these things, rather than look into something that have adverse health effect at this point in time. So anytime one chooses to quit, be it now, be it tomorrow, be it next year, is an excellent time to quit.
All right, so I would definitely agree with Mr. Young that there is no better time to quit than now. And it's natural to think, yes, I'm stressed, so why not get a de-stressor? And as we mentioned earlier, the nicotine would trigger the release of dopamine and these happy emotions, but it's very short-lived. And what can happen is, especially in a time like this in which you're very stressed out, you become so dependent on it, and that would definitely cause you to want to smoke more. Remember, smoking more makes you more sick, And also it exposes those around you to the smoke, and they also can get sick. And please remember, with more smoking, there's a higher risk of addiction. And with even just not having it, there's a withdrawal. You're feeling stressed, anxious, you need it, you cannot sleep, the insomnia. So it's important not to think of the solution as smoking more, because you're only just worsening the cycle of addiction, and it's not healthy. So I would agree, the best time to stop is now. So finding ways and solutions to stop.
Another question from a youth. One may not show signs and symptoms of COVID-19, yet in my community, I see the guys on the block constantly share their weed and cigarette with each other. Does that increase the chance of being infected? And what can the government do to stop this nonsense?
How about I answer the first part and give anyone on the panel the second part? So the first part about other boys or young men being on the block, definitely, if that is the case, first of all, there's no social distancing, and you are likely exposed to the likelihood of getting COVID-19. Number two, very often, as we mentioned, as WHO mentioned, that smokers are at increased risk because there's a lot of hand to mouth, and not just with cigarettes, but other forms of nicotine delivery. There's a lot of sharing, and with sharing of the cigarettes, you're likely to spread coronavirus, and therefore it is definitely a high risk situation, and we would not recommend it.
Okay, to the second half of the question, I do believe that the government is doing all within their power to help us to stop the spread and transmission of COVID-19 at the very moment. The Ministry of Health have put out its advisories, they have given us guidelines on terms of prevention, social distancing, and I think it is for us now as individuals to own the responsibility of protecting our own selves. And if we, given the fact that we have not had a high number, or we have yet to reach community spread in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a lot of persons have taken COVID-19 to be a joke. And I think this question should not be about what the government can do, but what can I do to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in my community. Thank you.
If I may just add to what Marlon would have said, he would have agreed that it is not a problem that the government should solve, but it's a personal problem, it's persons. But I think that maybe we should now have opening hours for the shops, because since we now have persons won't be liming around certain areas unless there is some form of entertainment or sale. So now if we put shops should be closed at 7 p.m., then hopefully the guys are off the block by that time, preventing helping to curb the spread of COVID-19 and social distancing, physical distancing.
So a final question for today. Do you think that young people think that tobacco is a serious problem in SVG?
No, I don't think that that the youths understand that it is a serious problem that we face. I could also remember when living in a community where there are the Rastafarians, the religious Rastafarians. Now they would say they are smoking their weed straight. I don't know if we understand what that means, but that's just smoking the marijuana alone. Now with the mixture, I'm not sure how many of us are aware, but if we understand there's a mixture now with the tobacco and the marijuana together, and that has a different effect than just smoking the marijuana alone. So I don't really think that they really understand that tobacco has a serious effect on their brain and their body functions.
I will also make reference to the Global Youth Tobacco Survey that was done in 2018. And what stood out was the fact that 58.7% of students thought that other people's tobacco smoking is harmful to them. That's almost like a 50-50. So there are quite a bit of persons who didn't think being exposed to tobacco smoke was a problem. So it means that it's possible that they don't understand how serious being exposed to tobacco smoke is. We mentioned that it was good that there were probably about 72% favored prohibiting smoking inside a closed public space. But the truth is there's still more work to be done. And this is, as mentioned, this was a good forum in which we could talk about the ill effects of tobacco smoking and tobacco use. And it definitely is a way that we can encourage schools to make it an important part of their curriculum in terms of educating and trying to start, whether it's at home, at school, teaching about what's the serious effects of tobacco smoking, and hopefully changes can be made and students and youths will understand and would say no whenever they're tempted.
All right, I would have to join my fellow panelists and say, no, I do not believe that we have seen tobacco to be a serious issue. There's still a lot of our young people, according to this survey, who think that those who smoke are attractive or they're cooler than the rest. There's still a lot of our young people from the survey that have basically said that they have seen persons smoking on or around school premises. 47% of these students say that they have been exposed to secondhand smoke in public areas. And we just have to take a walk around Kingston on any given day and we would see the real magnitude of the problem, where everybody walks around thinking that it's just okay to blow smoke in someone's face. And that tells us that we do not take tobacco smoking or the consumption of tobacco product as serious as we should. Thank you.
So before we close, what advice would you give to the youths that are viewing?
Okay, so what advice I would give? One, remember that tobacco smoking kills. And therefore, it's important for you to build the ability to say no, whether it is to tobacco or anything else. And this is definitely what would influence your future. Each decision you make is influencing your future, how healthy you are, the life you will live. So make wise choices today because it definitely will influence your future.
What advice I would give? The advice I would leave with our young people is that tobacco is indeed a serial killer. It is a killer that kills one person every 40 seconds that we have on this earth. And it continues to claim the life of many of our productive men and women. And what I would advise you at this point in time is to take the message that we have brought to you serious. And I would really advise that each and every one of us would find ways in which to deal with our problems rather than to look towards tobacco. Young people, you are in your prime. It is your healthiest time, and it's for you to invest for your future, because whatever you waste today would not be regained tomorrow. Thank you.
What advice I will give? It is quite simple. If you are a non-smoker, remain a non-smoker. If you are a smoker of tobacco, whether it be tobacco or marijuana, it is time to stop. It is time to seek help. Thank you.
At this time, we'll have a few brief remarks from the Chief Health Promotion Officer, Ms. Patsy Wiley.
Thank you very much, Donnette. And let me say on behalf of the Ministry of Health, Wellness and the Environment and the Pan American Health Organization, let me say a hearty thank you to our youths for so ably presenting on this forum today. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is the first and only public health treaty that was developed by the World Health Organization. I remember very well being St. Vincent and the Grenadines representative at the negotiations over the years. St. Vincent also is a member of that treaty. Unfortunately, over that period of time and still now, we have been trying very hard to enact legislation over many years. We are at a point now at which I think that we have done the best that we can in the Ministry of Health, in that we have a draft legislation that is at the Attorney General's chambers waiting for review and then submission to the Ministry of Health. Once that is done, we would submit to Cabinet for approval. And we are hoping that that process is hastened. I've listened to the comments from members of the panel, and it is evident, and also results from the survey indicate that we do have an issue with tobacco consumption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we want very much to move from that point, from having a draft legislation. Although we have moved one step ahead, we need to move to the other step of having laws enacted. At this point, any youth can buy or sell cigarette, they can trade in it, and there's no law to address the issue. So that is one step that we need to go forward with. We know that among our young people there are discussions. The Youth Tobacco Survey gave us an indication of what we need to do. You mentioned about the use of electronic cigarette. That is something new to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we need to nip it in the bud very early. You are young people, and you need to be advocates for your peers. So I'm going to challenge you on that you continue the discussion among your groups. And we also have the support of one of our young medical practitioners who can bring further light on the damages that are done to individuals. The tobacco industry, they are well placed, they are innovative, they try very hard to capture new it's like a revolving door. Once I have the youth, I've captured them, they're addicted. We don't have to bother about them anymore. They get older, they get chronic disease, they die. They also need to continue to fill like a void. So it is your responsibility to look after yourselves. We in the Ministry of Health, we are here to support you. I know that you have your many groups within the communities. It's for you to continue to keep the discussion alive. So on behalf of the Ministry of Health, let me thank you very much, and also the Pan American Health Organization. They have been our technical support over the years, and let me say thank you very much for a very fruitful discussion. Have a pleasant day. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us online, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. Let's make every day World No Tobacco Day. Take care.